The second Sunday in Lent affords us a trip back to the beginning of Abram's journey, the call from God to make his way to the promised land of Canaan. And he responds so readily, and there's a depth in this. You know, God calls out to Abram and says, I've got land for you, I've got descendants, I've got greatness for you and for them, a great nation I will bring forth from you, and you'll bless each other. It's a reciprocal blessing. You know, my blessing will flow through you. And it's just a curious promise. We don't have a lot of background, but I think it's worth reflecting on. You know, the scripture doesn't tell us that Abram was dissatisfied in a particular way. It doesn't say that he didn't have enough. It doesn't say that he was fleeing anything in Ur of the Chaldeans. And it just there's reason for him to follow the promise. And I think that reason is underneath. I suspect he had everything that he, quote unquote, needed there where he was. He might have even been comfortable. But the Lord calls him forth to something so much more. The promise was too much to pass up. I mean, just tantalizing. You know, a great nation, blessing beyond belief. You know, this great land. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm all in. And in so many ways, that's the spiritual call on our own lives. I mean, is not the promise of God for us to set forth and follow Him? You know, following the heart that leads us to Him. Is that not too tantalizing to pass up? And then there's the reality too. You know, it is the heart that pulls us forth. You know, the Lord speaks to us and our own desire for greatness. You know, just as we heard last week in the book of Genesis, you know, the Lord breathes life into humanity. You know, places on their hearts a desire to be like God's. God calls us through the desire that's there for greatness as He has placed it on us. Sometimes we get a little twisted up, but that's it. He's designed us to respond in a way for those extraordinary things in our lives. Abram goes forth, and ultimately, you know, life is achieved in such a grand way for, you know, not even so much him, but the descendants that would be Israel. The disciples find themselves in the gospel reading following Jesus up this mountain, up this journey to the heights, and they see Him transfigured before them. And an extraordinary moment. They're following Jesus for the same way. They've left behind sometimes comfortable lives, sometimes decent ways of living. For what? For the greatness that their hearts know that they are called to. And then they find it, at least they think they do, in the transfiguration, and they just want to stay there. It's so glorious. And Jesus says, dudes, you have no idea. Like, this ain't even close. This is just a glimpse of the glory. Like, I want so much more for you that I don't want you to stop here. Like, even the grandest of experiences of the disciples' lives don't compare to what Jesus has in store, you know, beyond His passion, death, and resurrection. And I think above all the things, you know, in these two particular experiences ought to be for us an encouragement that the Lord desires, you know, our greatness. And certainly there's times where we're only going to experience that in an interior sort of way. There's going to be times in life where we do great things, but you know, we're never going to encounter, you know, the depth of what God has in store for us if we keep our hearts locked inside and don't follow the call, you know, outside of ourselves to, the great things and delightful relationship with Him that He has called us to. So, you know, so much of it is a response of the heart and the call of the heart, and Jesus doesn't want us to stop where we think we ought to stop, but to follow our hearts all the way to Him in heaven. So much of what this journey of Lent is about. You know, follow Him up the mountain, see His glory radiating before you, and ultimately, as in both readings, find your way to the promised land of heaven.